Good afternoon. Thanks for hanging out with us today, whether you're hanging out live or you're watching this recording later. We are in our Accessibility for Canvas webinar. My name is Corey McNeil, and I am your product manager for Canvas and Go Open NC on the home-based team at the Department of Public Instruction. So thanks for joining us today. If this is your first webinar with me, thanks for being here. Usually I just like to start with an opportunity for people to kind of say in the chat, your name, your school district, and kind of your role. So if you want to open up the chat there, you are welcome to kind of share that information so we kind of know who's hanging out with us today. Awesome. Thank you guys for doing that. That way, just if you don't know who's in the room with you now, you know. Let me start by sharing our slide deck with you all. I'm going to put it here in the chat, and I'm also going to share my screen, but I will be moving in now the slide deck in our Canvas instance. So you are in here today because we're talking about accessibility in Canvas. So let me go ahead and get started with that conversation today. And I, of course, lose you guys, so you got to give me a second to reorient myself when I share my screen because I want to be able to see you guys in case you have a question. And you are welcome to interrupt me. I would prefer this to rather be a conversation than me talking at you for the next hour because I don't enjoy doing that. So if you have a question or curious about something in Canvas or as it relates to whether it's accessibility or not, feel free to bring it up. So kind of what we're going to talk about today, I love to always start with our why and why accessibility matters. So it will be a little bit more of the abstract at first, so talking about some of the why there at the beginning, and then we'll go through some of the accessibility features that are available inside of Canvas, some likes and dislikes that I have, and then some just general best practices. And then I always put Q&A at the end as an option because I want to put it on the agenda so people know that that's an option. But like I just said, feel free to interrupt me, please. All right, so our why. You may not believe in peer-reviewed research. You may just think that's, just a weird thing that Corey included in his slides. Well, that's okay. So I love to talk about our why as why EdTech is important, especially when we're talking about the subject of accessibility. There's lots of data and research that especially talks about the past 3 years that we went through, that small little thing of a pandemic, and how those things obviously impacted our work. So there's some resources there that I think are really relevant in our work as educational technology role as to why it's important. Also, if you're not familiar with the digital learning competencies and especially the teacher evaluation or the administrator evaluation rubric, how we use technology in the classroom are very relevant there as well. So those are the relevant standards and areas that are pertinent to educational technology. So I always like to share those so that people know how those things relate when you're talking about your evidences, professional development that you're participating in, examples like this. And then, of course, the digital learning competencies, if you're not familiar with those, which probably will be revised sometime in the near future now that we have a new digital learning plan. But I like to share those as it relates to, like I said, professional development, professional growth, and how you can align all of that content. So accessibility matters. I'm going to start with a question. You're welcome to come off mute and have that conversation or just put it in the chat. So what are some barriers that you have seen a learner face when it comes to complete online work? And this can be Canvas related or not. It can be device related, other software that your district uses. What's something that you guys have seen as a barrier?
Are you speaking connectivity issues? Or are you talking more of the learning
connectivity can absolutely be a barrier, because it's not just readily available in all areas of the state, depending on, things like geographic location, socioeconomic status, all of those types of things. So, the readily availability of the internet connection as well as the device or some things I would view as a barrier. I saw someone put something in the chat, and let me see if I can get my hands on it. Of course, it's not going to give it to me now.
Rick, that was me that put one of the things in the chat, and I'm just going to tell you what I said. That way you don't have to look for it. screen readers didn't always read exactly what's on the screen. And especially if there are images and they haven't been tagged, it has no clue.
Yep. So, you know, it's a piece of software, right? So it's going to do its best to interpret what that information says on the screen, but there's no guarantee that it's going to know how to read that in a really great way. Hi, for those of you that are joining us, we're just talking about some barriers that you may experience as it relates to accessibility, and this is just a broad conversation. So we've talked about connectivity, screen readers, just in general. Anybody else have any barriers that you've seen when working with a student as it relates to accessibility and technology?
I can also say that various universal design, learning issues that, can affect the student, the broad spectrum of those.
Brenda, you skipping ahead in the slides?
No,
Okay.
I'm
Just
sorry.
kidding, just kidding. No, you're good. It's like it's like I gave you that ahead of time because you know that's exactly what we're going to talk about. We're talking about universal design. So I'm so glad that you brought that up. She gets an A+, everybody. I'm so sorry.
I'll be quiet.
You know, there might be other opportunities for gold stars to be given out, but no, I'm just kidding. So right, there are lots of different barriers that exist to technology, whether it be hardware, software, you know, tactile things, universal design. We're talking about, you know, different learning styles and modalities. And so that next question there, what support can we provide to reduce or eliminate those barriers? So, you know, some of those things that we've talked about, connectivity. So, you know, there's the broadband initiative, the emergency connectivity funds, all of those things that have existed really coming out of COVID that have tried to address some of the broadband inequities that we see throughout the state in North Carolina. You know, a lot of districts have adopted one-to-one initiatives to supply students with devices. So when we're thinking about that framework, that taxonomy of connectivity, you know, we're doing a lot to address that bottom layer, I think, but I think we're going to start seeing and trying to address the higher needs of things like accessibility and some forms of technology and software services. Does anybody have an example of somewhere you've seen a solution been implemented, whether in your current or former district, of meeting a need for accessibility?
I know in Wayne County during COVID, we did a lot of the pop-up hot spots in the communities, surrounding communities.
Yep. I have terrible wait time, so that's about all you're going to get. So if you want to, you got to speak up. All right, moving on. So I think there's lots of ways that we can address that, and we're going to talk about some of those today. So, well, first of all, like I said, why does accessibility matter? I think you already feel as though that it matters because you're here in this call today, you're in this conversation. But you know, you may have to convince other stakeholders or other key leadership that you may work with and for. So why does that matter? There's lots of different things here that you can look at. Supporting inclusion benefits all of the students when we talk about accessibility. Specifically when I'm talking about Canvas, usually the things that are more accessible are just better course design. So they're just good practices altogether when we're talking about Canvas. And obviously we know that there are certain legal requirements when it comes to making courses accessible for all students. So there's some resources there around what those information are. Has anybody heard of WCAG or WCAG? I've heard it pronounced either way. Right, I'm seeing some head nods. Okay, so I really like their accessibility guidelines, and this is, I would say, more predominantly used when we're talking about website development, but really as Canvas is essentially a website itself for courses and other resources that school systems are certain to use that are online. We talk about this acronym, which is what they call their POUR acronym. And so if you want to reference their website, there is a link to it here, but these are just the surface level definitions. So is an object perceivable? So can all learners see and hear that information? So when I'm thinking about something in Canvas, if I have text on the screen, is it going to be able to be read by a screen reader? Can a student access that content and click on it? Is it operable? Can all learners navigate the information independently? And, you know, this gets scaffold in a way, because we have to think about our earliest of learners and our highest level of learners. So we have to think about how we scaffold that information as well in all of these categories. Is it understandable? Is it consistent and predictable design as far as the course and the content? And then is it robust? Does the content work for all learners on a range of technologies that include assistive technologies? So as an example, we kind of go into a more specific examples of what their POUR acronym is. I really like these because it helps me as a course designer, or as someone, if I'm maybe having a conversation with a teacher who is not familiar with, accessibility guidelines and standards inside of Canvas or another tool. You can kind of see what some information here. So perceivable, not using color alone to indicate something. I think this is one of the ones that we as designers can mess up sometimes. Well, I'll just highlight this. Well, you got to think about students who may have a visual impairment or may have a colorblind situation. So you don't want to make necessarily that you're only using color to indicate something. So that's one I always like to point out. I think this is just a good practice, avoiding content that flashes. I'm gonna be really honest with you. It is not Microsoft PowerPoint 2002, ladies and gentlemen. The little like flashy things. We can't be doing that. That's crazy. No, I'm just kidding. You do you, but I would just say avoiding content that flashes is probably for the best. So that's WCAG's acronym. Like I said, just an example that I think is a good structure to follow when you're talking about course design and making your content accessible. Another one of those is universal design for learning. So as we're talking about this framework and looking at it, it's more, I would say, addressing modalities for individuals. So do we have content in a way that offers as close to that in-person learning environment as we can in a digital or hybrid environment? And we all know that that is not 100% one-for-one kind of situation. I may not be able to recreate every single experience or opportunity in a physical environment the way I can in a digital, or vice versa. So, what does that kind of look like? And I really like this framework that they provide you with on universal design. And, what does it mean in a nutshell? So I'm just kind of skip to that point here. So basically what we're looking at, it gives the students the same information throughout different formats. So if I have a text that I want my students to read, do I have a video that provides the same content information? Do I have maybe an audio of that, or does the software have the ability to read that to the student, that kind of information? Multiple means of expression, so giving students different opportunities. I really think this one has really taken off for teachers already and coaches and developers, because we've seen so much in the area of PBLs or personalized learning, where students really have lots of choices to demonstrate their mastery of understanding the way that best meets their learning styles. And then multiple ways of engagement. So like I said, ways to spark their interest with the content themselves. Any questions on WCAG or universal design for learning? Okay, like I said, I don't have long. I don't know why. I don't do well with the silence. Some teachers I know, you can just sit there. I can't do it. It's just never been me. So what does it look like inside of Canvas? And which is really the reason you're here today, but I always like to lay a foundation, because I don't think it's fair for someone to come into a conversation about accessibility without us talking about what accessibility means. So when we're looking inside of Canvas, one of the first things that I point course developers and teachers and coaches to are the course evaluation checklists. If you've never used these before, this really kind of is not specifically about accessibility. This is just good design practices in general. So these checklists that exist from Canvas, and if you're in the slide deck, there's a mobile version, and then there's the full website version. So depending what devices your students are using, it might be important to look at one or the other, or maybe both. So the one on the right here is the mobile design version. So if you have students using the Canvas app, if you're using any sort of tablet devices, or if they're looking at it on their phone for whatever reason. And then this is the full-fledged HTML browser version, so a Chromebook or a laptop. When I open these, you can kind of see what you can read all about their purpose and kind of what that information is. But I'm actually going to go back to the screenshot because it doesn't move. They have all of the categories of information and they break it up into 1, 2, and 3-star items. And then what I would tell teachers when they're working in their course design, they also look at the UDL standards, and many of them have those standards associated tagged to them. So you're talking about, those are the items when you're talking about addressing things in an accessibility lens that you want to make sure that you're addressing. The star rating is a teacher's familiarity with using Canvas. So if I'm looking at a BT or someone who's never used Canvas before, I'm going to look at that individual and I'm going to hand them that document or send it to them and say, hey, when we're thinking about your course design, focus on the 1-star things. Those are the things that are essential. That's going to make your course successful and help it get it going. Maybe after a semester or a year, and when they feel like they're ready to try some new things, look at those 2-star things or maybe even some 3-star things. Those are more advanced things inside of Canvas, like mastery paths and things of that nature. So any questions on the course evaluation checklist? Has anybody used these before, seen this before? Is this new information?
Not really new. Just don't use it as much as I'd like to.
Yeah, that is the thing. You gotta keep it in your back pocket, and the thing just to remember. Also, if you're in a leadership position, I think this is always a great document to send out to teachers at the beginning of the semester or year, just as a, hey, as you're thinking about setting up your courses back to school kind of thing. They also actually have one that's specifically for beginning and end of year checklists. It's not necessarily about the course design. That's more about like making sure that you've published your modules and making sure like those are more like procedural things. But as far as the course design goes, that's what this evaluation checklist covers. The next thing I'm going to talk about is the accessibility checker. So if you haven't used this, this is a native feature inside of Canvas and in most areas that really helps you design content in a way that's going to try to use a little bit of intuitive software to determine if the content you are creating is accessible. So if you're not familiar with it, anywhere you see these links are guides. They're called the Canvas guides. If you're not familiar with those, great resource for help information from Canvas. So what I can do is anywhere I see this little icon inside of Canvas, I can have it run a check on a page that I'm developing or content that I'm creating to make sure that it's accessible. And so I'm going to demo that for you. So here I am inside of Canvas, and I've made this page about the accessibility checker and about what it can do. So it's really looking for header information to see that I'm not jumping around in the header styles. And if you haven't used headers or encourage your teachers to use headers, this is a great way for screen readers to know it uses those header classifications to ensure that it's reading the information in a proper order and sequence. And they get tripped up if it jumps around. So if you're heading 1 to heading 4, that kind of thing. So the rule of thumb there is no more than 2 jumps. So like I could go from heading 1 to heading 2 or heading 1 to heading 3, but I really shouldn't jump more than 2 levels in my headings. It's also looking for bullets and lists. Make sure that if I just have a carriage return list of items, that I'm actually using those bullets or numberings. And then alt text for information. So making sure that any images are classified with alt text. It's also looking for font styles and colors to make sure that, you can kind of read that, but that's not great. It's also looking for things like hyperlinks and making sure that content is in there in this format. So, making sure that it says, link to Quality Matters with the link that way, as opposed to this format, which is actually the incorrect way to do that. And then tables. Tables are the ones that really get you when it comes to screen readers, I'll be honest, because they are very difficult to set up in a way that is accessible. So I tell teachers or designers when I'm working with them, if you can avoid a table, avoid a table. But if you have to use a table for whatever reason, making sure that you have headers in each of those first row, and the table really needs a caption. And you can kind of see that here. So I'm going to demo this for you. I'm actually going to edit this page. And the accessibility checker is right here next to the keyboard shortcuts, which I always think is a little radio, but it's not, it's a keyboard. So when I click that, it's going to show me that I have 6 things that it has identified as accessibility issues with my page. And it's going to take me through them. It's going to say, hey, this picture doesn't have an alt text. So it's already pulled the file name of the image when I uploaded it inside of Canvas. So I could just say, you know, it's the Canvas logo, and I can hit apply. Or I have another option which I can classify it as a decorative image, which, you could make the argument here, it's just the Canvas logo, that it probably is just a decorative image. And basically that means a screen reader is going to skip it. When I go to the next thing, you can kind of see here, this header, so I've skipped too many header levels here. So I've got header 2, and this is, I think, just paragraph text. So I can change it, I can remove its header setting, I can do all those types of things to adjust that. Here again, like I said, because screen readers rely on that information to accurately read the screen. I have another alt text issue. Here it's identified that color that we were looking at, so I intentionally obviously set that as a really pale gray color, and it's going to give me some recommendations here. So I can say, you know, you can see how that apply button doesn't turn blue for me to submit that color change until it moves into an area that meets that 3-to-1 ratio requirements. So I think that's a really cool thing where you could not, you know, you're just not stuck in this infinite loop of guessing the wrong color that's really not still accessible. I can actually change the color until it gets happy with that. And then, like I said, my friend the table down here at the bottom. So it should include a caption, and really when I type that caption, it's going to put it right here at the top of this table in between this last sentence and the actual table itself. So it would display that caption for everyone, not just as someone who's using a screen reader, but anybody who is viewing that table, they're going to see that caption sentence that you put there ahead of it. I'm not going to save any of these issues because I use this same page for other trainings, but you can kind of see how that looks. And anywhere you see this rich content editor, so the box that we're in right here, you should have access to the accessibility checker. And what I tell people is those are the things it looks for. There are other things obviously that relate to accessibility that it's not capable of looking for, but I do tell teachers and course designers it is a way to start in your journey for accessibility in your content and making sure that content is more accessible for your students. Any questions about the accessibility checker inside of Canvas? Okay, moving on to our next thing. Oh, I put it out here in a list. And so sometimes I don't have enough time to demo this, so I just put screenshots in here. So you're welcome to take these slides and share them with a colleague. This is what it can look for. This is what it looks like. That's that demo page. I actually put that demo page in Commons. So if you recreate this training and want to share it with your staff and colleagues, you can pull that exact same demo page that I've shared in Commons that you're welcome to use. What does it not look for? And I actually put this through the POUR acronym so you can kind of see it doesn't look for closed captions and transcriptions in videos. So if you're placing a video in your page, it's not going to highlight that as something you may or may not have in your video. So making sure that you're looking here, especially at things like LTI, so any of those learning tools that you're bringing inside of Canvas, it doesn't have the ability to scan those either. But another way, like I said, it's a start in your accessibility journey, but not necessarily something that's going to be holistic. The next thing I'm going to talk about is the link validator. And here again, this is more one of those tools that's just overall good practice, not necessarily something that is specifically linked to accessibility. The link validator is a way for Canvas to search a course and ensure that the links inside of a given course go to somewhere that is actually accessible and clickable by a learner or a participant inside your course. So how does that work? So when I'm inside of any course, I'm going to go to my settings, and you can probably very familiar with this page where I'm going to change my course image or maybe change any of my term run dates, any of those things. And then that very last option over here on the right hand side is that link validation check. So if I'm going to go back over here to my sandbox course, oh yeah, we don't care about that. There's that validate links. And so what happens when I click on that, it's going to say, hey, do you want to start this link validation. And so I click start. And essentially what it's doing in this process, it's going to scan my course. So the more content you have in your course, the longer it takes, right? Because it's going to reach out to every single link that it can find inside of your course, whether that be a link to a page or a link to other resources and information externally or stuff inside of Canvas, and say, hey, can I get to this content? This is something, like I said, I share with teachers. This is a good thing to do as the semester starts, especially if you're teaching a course maybe you taught last semester or last year, because the content that you have used may not necessarily be accessible or reachable for the new semester. And as a person who teaches a class, I do this every semester because what I don't want is my students getting to the module for whatever that unit is, and we all discover that the link that I created to that, or that resource that I really love, that article that we were all going to read, is no longer posted. So now I have to scramble and find something different to fill that lesson or what have you. So you can kind of see what it looks like. I found one broken link here. This is something internal, probably because it's a quiz that I should have deleted, but it's still linked to somewhere. So this is just a sandbox course. So who knows what those errors are. But if I'm looking more from a screenshot perspective, you can kind of see there's the link validation, and this is what it looks like. So those sources were unreachable. So what I really love about this is the hyperlink at the top where it says homepage 2, homepage 3 will let me go to that page inside of Canvas. So I can jump right to the spot where that issue is. I can fix that link with a new resource or take it out altogether before my students see it or before the semester begins. So it's always a good thing to run that link validator, like I said, at the beginning of the semester, so that you check to make sure all your links work. Now, is it foolproof? No. The one thing that I see that happens sometimes with this, as an example, if a link is behind a login page, so if it's something that's inside of NC Cloud, as an example, it doesn't have the ability to check that because it can only go as far as NC Cloud. It's going to say, hey, NC Cloud, yes, that's a good, that resource exists, that website is valid, but it can't check the resource behind that. So you may not necessarily, you may get a false positive, if you will, that it can't check resources behind a login wall. So that's just something to consider when running that link validator. Any questions about link validator? Okay. The next thing we're going to talk about is Immersive Reader. Now, I will tell you that Immersive Reader has to be turned on by your Canvas administrator for your district. So if you are that person, I can talk to you about how to turn that on. If you are not, and you don't see what I'm about to show you, that most likely means it's not turned on for your district, and you want to reach out to them about turning it on. Immersive Reader is a tool. Now, it is an integration with Microsoft to leverage, I'm going to say, somewhat screen reading, but also phonics and a little bit of a dictionary standpoint here. What I love about it is it's not something you have to turn on for the individual student. It's a global setting. So if you turn it on for your Canvas instance, you can share this with your teachers. And if student A needs it, great, it's there for them. They can leverage it. If student B doesn't need it, they don't feel any different about the learning experience because it's a feature they can turn on independently as a student if they need it. So the one downside is if you do have students using the Canvas app, it's not accessible there. It's only through the web version. So if you're using, like I said, the Canvas student app, you'd want to encourage them to log in through the website. So, and that is even on the mobile website, you can access it, but not the mobile app. What does the Immersive Reader look like? So here's some screenshots as an example, and I'll show you what it can do. So anywhere there is a page that has content that can be read, with the exception of assessments. So quizzes, whether that's classic quizzes or new quizzes, do not fall under this category, but pages, assignments, and I don't know if discussions, I'd have to go back and look what discussions, but it gives me the ability to see that. And where it's going to function is anywhere I see this button. So I'm going to go back to my sandbox course here. I'm going to go back to this Canvas accessibility page. And it's this button in the far right-hand corner that says Immersive Reader with a little book and speaker icon. So when I click that, the page is going to reload, and you obviously see it has stripped away everything except for the relevant text and information. You can see there was my image that, I didn't fix the alt text for it, so it's still, wrong, but that's okay. I can see I really just have the core essential information laid out in a clear text format. You can see there's my table and that information let out in a vertical way. I can have it read the page to us. I can have it speed up, slow down. I can choose a different voice if that's something I want. I can also change my text preferences. So, if it's a visual impairment thing, I can obviously crank up the size. I can increase or decrease the spacing. I can choose a font. Here again, if we're talking about a color blind situation, I can change the colors. There's tons to pick from. I can show the formatting, essentially, like if it's bold, italics, that kind of thing, the font script. I can also toggle on a couple different parts of speech. This would have been very helpful for Corey as a child because parts of speech still, it's like, what's a noun? We're not sure. I'm just being honest, we all have our flaws. So we're trying to figure out what those things are really helpful for students. I can also segment the syllables. So I think about those early learners breaking down words into their structures. I can really kind of clear that text out, and I can make it just as, complicated, or as, if I'm only really struggling identifying, verbs. So I can see, okay, what are all the verbs in this paragraph? I can also change some things with the line focus. So I can really zone in to how many lines I'm looking at a time. I can also use a picture dictionary, which I don't know how great it is. So like some things are good. Pages, links, not so much. External, okay. It's very abstract. I like that. Site, but you can kind of click on the words, and here again, you're thinking about students' development, defining that word and knowing what it means. It's hard. So I may need those features turned on. And like I said, the students can check as many of these boxes that they need or don't need. And then the last thing that I really love to share is that it has a variety of languages that it can use as a translation matrix. So I think about our students who need that accommodation. They certainly have access to that. So sure. So I can then click on the individual word. I get the visual, and then I get the translation as well as what it is in English for the individual student. I can also translate the whole document if I needed to, which I think is super cool. But like I said, there are some limitations to the immersive reader where it really falls flat, like I said, are those assessment pieces. So quizzes are not really accessible to that. And that really has a lot to do with the fact that the question types, right? They're not always all just multiple choice or word-based text. A lot of them maybe have drag and drop or true false or types of things that really are just more heavy in the lifting, as opposed to a page or some content area that you could easily translate this. Questions, thoughts, comments about immersive reader?
Didn't realize it did the translations. That's really awesome.
Yeah, that was a version update a little while back that I thought was really impressive that it added to. And like I said, if you don't see that in your instance, I would highly encourage you to talk to your Canvas admin to have them turn it on. And if they don't know how to do that, I'm the person they would reach out to. So send them my way. Just some UDL sample pages. So these are some examples that I like to share with a teacher, because a lot of times I get asked, well, okay, what does a good instructionally designed page look like inside of Canvas? And these are just some examples. Are these 100% perfect? No. Are they just to give you a reference? Absolutely. So, we can see I'm using some emojis and I'm using text. I'm using the color and the bold to indicate this is the header for Unit 2. I've got learning targets. I have some sentences. I'm breaking up that text into the to-do list, and here's your learning targets. And then I'm saying, okay, lesson 1. These are our 5 things we're going to accomplish. How does that relate to the UDL standards? You can see, okay, well, that's UDL 1.2, 4.2, and 3.7, that we are addressing these standards in the way this page is designed. I'm not going to sugarcoat things. People are like, well, this takes a lot of work. Yes, it does. That's why there are literal people, their entire jobs are instructional designers, right? So instructional design takes a lot of work, and I would say as much as you can leverage a PLC or a work group, that you can design an ideal page and then divide and conquer that resource and information. I think it's a great way to accomplish that task. Another example here, again, not perfect, not right, wrong, or indifferent, but you're using, like I said, using some images, we're using line breaks, we're using links in a way that's not just say, here's a link to in the HTTP, it's actually embedded in that content. And you can see those UDL standards that we are addressing. With that, I've got some 5 best practices that I'd like to share. We've kind of hit on most of them already, but I like to use them as a summation type of thing. When you are using color contrast, like I said, Canvas will try to alert you in most capacities, making sure, but as you're creating other things, whether that be like a flyer or other types of graphics inside your instruction, making sure that it's legible in that 3-to-1 rule. So making sure that the font size, the color, and the background are all in a good ratio with each other, to making sure that that content is accessible. If you don't know or not, I love this color contrast checker. It basically kind of gives you some, okay, I want to use this color in the foreground, this color in the background, what's my contrast ratio? And if it's not fitting that 3-to-1, that's a good example of, okay, I need to pick some different colors. So if you need that support, that's talking about the accessibility checker that, like I said, it already references. When to use colors for accessibility. Like I said, picking colors that are too hard to distinguish. Don't use too many colors. I love a good, color coordination as much as the next person, but using so many that it's distracting and confusing. I always have to remember that some members of my team, have a blue green. So, making sure that we're using the right colors and not just using those colors to indicate anything is also helpful. Adding alt text, so we kind of walk through that with the accessibility checker. Any images that you have inside of your learning management system, wherever that may be, ensuring that they have that. Or if it's not, they can mark them as decorative. So here again, even in this screenshot, so it's pulled in that title that is congressionalcongress.jpg. So I want to make sure that I drop that .jpg and that I would just save that as is. I would not necessarily classify this one as decorative because it's probably relating to the curriculum instruction at hand. So that's kind of the definition that I use with people is, okay, well, when do I use that decorative image checkbox? And if it's adding to the instructional lesson, then it's probably not decorative, right? If it's just, an emoji or a logo of some variety, it's probably not something that it's critical to the lesson. Using those heading styles, like I said, in the accessibility checker helps you trying to look for those, but making sure that your pages are laid out in that logical sense, that we're using those heading styles to break up that content in a way that makes it not only, like I said, easy to read for a person who's not using a screen reader, but also accessible to a student who may be leveraging a screen reader. I love this image, the good, bad, and ugly of hypertext. So making sure that you are following that kind of guidelines where it is following in the natural sentence or the cadence of what we're reading. So visiting web's aimed links for text articles for details versus click here for details. I'm really bad about that in the email. When I'm sending someone an email, I'm like, click here. But I try to do, at least when I'm designing a course or something in instructional capacity, I'm using it in a grammatically correct sentence. And then, of course, I never want to just drop the URL and not make it right? So I love that. So sometimes I'm really bad about doing that in the email. But like I said, the course design is kind of a different hat that we wear. And then audio and visual, as much as you can, and if you have access to Studio, this is a little bit easier inside of Canvas for closed captioning. It will auto-generate those closed captions for you for a video. If you don't have access to Studio, leveraging something like YouTube or another service that's going to give you that transcript for a video or an audio file is really, really helpful. Like I said, in Canvas, you can, if you upload an MP4 file, you can attach the transcript to it. I found that it's not always successful. So if you can leverage third-party tools like Studio and YouTube, those are really great tools that you can leverage. Well, we got done way earlier than I anticipated, but I'm going to open it up for questions, thoughts, comments, anything you feel like I didn't necessarily cover in this. For those of you that hopped in a little later, I will share the slide deck again. So if anyone doesn't have it, you are welcome to take that and run with it. Those are just resources that I've gathered through other presentations and things that I've shared and has been shared with me. So that's feel free to make a copy of it. But I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.